This is the Cleveland Podcast.
Fred Talks.
Hello, this is your favorite Mud Monster Fred in another Fred Talks episode. Let's talk about a weird exhibit piece that you can find in Cleveland, Ohio. Balto the dog. Some of you might have heard about Balto from the 1995 Disney film. Pretty famous for those who have watched it. But Balto is obviously a real-life dog. How did Balto come here, to Cleveland, Ohio of all places, when Balto was born in Alaska, became famous in Alaska? Even the owner lived in Alaska for huge portions of his life. What drew Balto to Cleveland? Why did Balto wind up in Cleveland? Why did Balto die in Cleveland? How did the Cleveland Museum of Natural History get their hands on a dog that, to this day, Alaska is still demanding to have the stuffed animal Balto returned to Alaska because, well, it's Alaska's native hero dog? We're going to address all of that in this Fred Talks episode. Let's talk about Balto. And all this information is courtesy of the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, and this is a brochure that is talking about Balto and the legacy of the Serum Run. The Serum Run is a run that occurs between the town of Nenana in Alaska and goes all the way to Nome. Now, historically, they say that it really starts in Anchorage, but the dog sled portion of it, where Balto becomes famous, really doesn't start until you hit the town of Nenana, which is hundreds of miles away from Anchorage, Alaska. Why does the Serum Run happen? Nome, Alaska in 1925 experiences a massive outbreak of diphtheria, which is a very deadly disease. According to Wikipedia, 2,100 people died of diphtheria around the world in 2015. While that might not sound like a lot, that's certainly more deadly than, per se, something like the common cold. And diphtheria in the earlier years of the world was a fairly deadly disease. It was not exactly something that was to be taken lightly. It's still not to be taken lightly now, as diphtheria can still cause permanent damage to a human individual. And the disease it looks gruesome. It's a very gruesome disease. I'll just keep it at that. You can look up the information. You can look up the images. It's not pretty. Nome, Alaska. How does it come to be? Nome, Alaska appeared on the map during one of the world's great gold rushes at the end of the 19th century. Fun fact, the Trump family started to make their fortune while in Alaska. Trump's grandfather did not make money through gold. In fact, he became broke looking for gold. He sold porridge and rice at an exuberant prices to miners who were desperate to get food while trapped in the northern parts of Alaska, aimlessly mining for gold. Some got rich, but most were just broke, lost homes, jobs. It was a mess. And somehow Trump's grandfather winds up accumulating a ton of money because he sold porridge and rice and other foods at high prices. Therefore, he then turned the money into real estate investment. Therefore, we get the whole Trump family, Trump's father, and then, of course, our 45th president. Take that as you will. But going back to Nome. Nome, again, emerges in the late 19th century as a result of a great gold rush, and it's located on the Seward Peninsula. The town's population had swelled to 20,000 by 1900 after gold was discovered on beaches along the Bering Sea. By 1925, however, much of the gold was gone, and scarcely 1,400 people were left in the remote northern outpost. Nome was icebound 7 months of the year, and the nearest railroad was more than 650 miles away in the town of Nenana. The radio telegraph was the most reliable means by which Nome could communicate with the rest of the world during the winter. Since Alaska was U.S. territory, the government also maintained a route over which relays of dog teams carried mail from Anchorage to Nome. A one-way trip along this path, called the Iditarod Trail, which eventually became the Iditarod Race later on, took about a month. The mushers who traversed the trail were the best in Alaska. Funny enough, Balto was born in this very town of Nome, and then eventually became owned by various other sledders that lived just outside of Nome, Alaska. A Race for Life. This is the next portion of the brochure. On January 20th, 1925, a radio signal went out, carried for miles across the frozen tundra. Nome calling, Nome calling. We have an outbreak of diphtheria. No serum, urgently need help. Nome calling, Nome calling. Nome's only doctor had diagnosed cases of diphtheria, an extremely contagious disease affecting the throat and lungs. The native Inuits were particularly vulnerable to this illness as they had been to measles and the flu, both of which wiped out entire villages. The frantic search for antitoxin began. What's important to note is that Nome is near a lot of the native tribes that live in the region, and they started to move to Nome because, well, it's a town and they're looking for jobs because the U.S. government does not do the best job in treating Native Americans fairly. If you have read any history textbook, case in point, look at the reservations, look at the Trail of Tears, various other crimes committed against Native American tribes. But anyway, let's move past the politics. These Native Alaskans had trouble finding jobs because, well, there's not many big jobs to look for in Alaska, particularly in where Nome is located, which is one of the more isolated parts of the state. After all, 7 months out of the year, the town is covered in ice and you really can't get access due to the ice. Therefore, Nome is really just in this isolated place that makes it hard for people to get anywhere. But Nome was a place with some jobs, with some opportunities that the Alaskan natives wanted. After all, the poverty in the northern parts of Alaska is quite high. There's very high rates of unemployment. There's also high rates of addiction, particularly to alcohol in these northern parts of Alaska. For those trying to look for a better life for their families, they move to Nome. Hence, we get this large population of Inuit Alaskans that exist in Nome. And that remains the case to this day, as over 3,000 residents live in Nome, and most of them are Native Alaskan in nature. Because of this, though, they have a lack of access to proper medical care because, well, it's not the Native Americans' fault that there's a lack of access to care, but because of the fact that they have a lack of exposure to more modern settings, they are more vulnerable to diseases that ordinarily wouldn't be as deadly, such as measles or diphtheria. Now, measles and diphtheria were major killers even during this time, but now there were cures being developed. And for those who lived in the cities, you saw those illnesses quite often. Therefore, it was not unusual to have large amounts of serums available to cure these various different illnesses. But because of the fact that diphtheria, it doesn't really occur too often in the northern parts of Alaska, in part because the cold just would destroy many germs, the diphtheria appearance in 1925 is rare. But it's also an illness that has not been really exposed to the tribes and the Native Alaskan people in Nome, which means that with diphtheria rapidly spreading, along with the fact that Nome had inadequate supplies of the serum needed to cure the disease, a large portion of the town was going to be wiped out by diphtheria. And that's important to note. On January 25th, 1925, this is a radio telegraph that is replying for this request for a serum. And Nome calls all these different places, and various cities are trying to get anything to get the remedy that's needed distributed to Nome. Finally, on January 25th, Anchorage calls. Anchorage calling. 300,000 units of serum located in Railway Hospital here. Package can be shipped by train to Nenana. Package weighs 20 pounds. By the time this telegraph is being sent out, the people who are trying to deliver this serum to the town of Nome, they are trying multiple methods. They try plane. Turns out the plane's frozen. They try by potentially motorized vehicle. That doesn't work either because frozen and the weather's too harsh. But what can work, though, are the dog teams that can use the dog trails, such as the Iditarod Trail, that can deliver the serum to the town of Nome. Again, the Iditarod Trail was a traditional dog mushing, dog sledding trail that was used to deliver mail when other methods of transportation were really inadequate or didn't exist. Therefore, the Iditarod Trail was a huge bastion in terms of delivering just packages all across, not just Anchorage to Nome, but all across the state of Alaska, which means that they're now using this mail-carrying route to deliver this very vital medicine needed to cure a potential disease that can wipe out an entire town in Nome. On January 27th, the serum arrives in Nenana by train and relay to the stricken city began. Wild Bill Shannon lashed the life-saving cargo to his sled and set off westward. It was 30 degrees below zero when Shannon started. Then it fell to minus 35 degrees, 40 degrees, 45, and finally minus 50 degrees. Shannon rushed on, mindless of the cold, until he handed the serum over to Edgar Calland in Tolovana, 52 miles from Nenana. On January 28th, he then delivers his various serums, and then we get various different people that deliver this serum. Now we get to the part with Balto. February 1st. Through blinding snow and hurricane-force winds, the vital serum was passed from Sapala to Charlie Olson, and then to Gunnar Kaasen. Had Kaasen had any inkling of how widely the storm would rage, he would not have chosen Balto to lead his team. Although Balto was one of Sapala's dogs, he was not thought of as a very good leader. But Balto proved his mettle when he plunged into the roaring blizzard at one point to save driver and team from instant death in the Tupcock River. No one believed Kaasen would make it through the storm, so when he arrived at the safety shelter, 21 miles from Nome, he found the next driver asleep. The team is running well, so they forged ahead. Their endurance was tested even further when a sudden, fierce blast of wind lifted both sled and dog into the air. While fighting to fight the sled and untangle the team, Kaasen's heart sank. The serum had disappeared. He frantically searched the snow with his bare hands. Miraculously, he found the serum. Before daybreak on February 2nd, 1925, Balto led Gunnar Kaasen's team into Nome. The town was saved. Exhausted and nearly frozen after the 53-mile run, Kaasen, Balto, and the rest of the mushing team became instant heroes across the United States. So then how did Balto get to Cleveland? Balto is now internationally known, and then what happens is Balto winds up being sold. Here's the breakdown on that. New accounts with glorified depictions of the serum race impressed people across the United States. Only weeks after the feat, Hollywood producer Sol Lesser contacted Leonard Sapala and asked to lease Balto and the rest of the team. Sapala welcomed the chance to rid himself of the newspaper dog, as he called Balto. Lesser also hired Kaasen to work with the dogs in Los Angeles for 10 weeks. Lesser took Kaasen and the team to Mount Rainier in Washington State, where they starred in the short subject film Balto's Race to Nome. The two-reel film was released in June 1925. During a dispute between Kaasen and Lesser over unpaid wages, it was revealed that Lesser had purchased the dogs from Sapala and sold them again. To make a living, Kaasen was forced to tour the country's vaudeville circuit with the dogs for 2 years. This would be the last time Kaasen worked with the team. He returned to Nome, and the dogs were relegated to yet another indignity. On a visit to Los Angeles, Cleveland businessman George Kimball discovered the dogs displayed in a dime museum. Pretty much it's like an exotic museum, basically for freakish things. And noticed that they were ill and mistreated. He knew the famous story of Balto and was outraged at seeing this degradation. He struck a deal with the dog's owner, Sam Houston, to buy them for $2,000 and bring them to Cleveland. But Kimball had only 2 weeks to raise the money. A Balto fund was established across the nation. Radio broadcasts appealed for donations. Headlines in the Cleveland Plain Dealer told of the push to rescue the heroes. School children collected coins and buckets, factory workers passed their hats, the West Reserve Kennel Club gave a much-needed financial boost. The people responded generously. In just 10 days, the deadlines read, City smashes over top with Balto's fund, Huskies to be shipped from coast at once. On March 19, 1927, Balto and 6 companions were brought to Cleveland and given a hero's welcome in a triumphant parade through Public Square. The dogs were then taken to the Brookside Zoo, now the Cleveland Metro Park Zoo, to live out their lives in dignity. It was said that about 15,000 people visited the dogs on the first day at the zoo. Then, Balto dies in 1933, and then the remains of Balto are donated to the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, where Balto resides today. And what can you learn about Balto? Balto's mount remains a part of the museum's permanent collections, carefully protected and cared for by museum curators. Balto also has been featured in numerous other exhibitions, particularly 2 exhibitions found in a local Anchorage museum that drew thousands upon thousands of people to visit Balto during a several-month period, the latest exhibition being in 1998. From there, Balto continues to be a legacy and an important part in the promotion of the Iditarod. Now, the Iditarod was not named due to Balto and the whole serum run, but the Iditarod has now become the national competition for dog sledding, which has now become really more of a sport rather than a way of transportation and a way of life. these days because, well, we have cars and machines that can easily go through the snow. However, the same famous serum run allowed dog sledding to become something that caught the attention of the nation, and it's become something that has been in the nation's eye since then. So due to Balto, you now have the Iditarod race, or rather, Balto was a major contributor to the Iditarod race. But it's also an example of how Clevelanders can come together to overcome crisis. Think about the crisis we're in now. How can we overcome this? How can we become our own Balto in our own story, where we can be a symbol of deliverance, a symbol of hope for people around us? Maybe we're a researcher. Maybe we're just a regular person who is a waiter fired from their job. Maybe we're just a person working from home. What can we do to make sure that we provide the best care for our loved ones, our family, our friends, our pets? What can we do to make sure that people around us get the best care? And for those of us who maybe are in more desperate situations, how can we help those people? After all, 22 million Americans recently have filed for unemployment. What can we do to assist? Even if you're an unexpected contributor like Balto, find ways to contribute to overcome this illness. After all, Balto helped Nome overcome a major epidemic in 1925. Even if it's a small thing, if we all work together, we all can have our own Balto stories and wind up overcoming the coronavirus. Thank you everyone for listening, and see you guys in a week.
Thanks for listening to the show. You can find us online at facebook.com/The Cleveland Podcast, or get links to all of our various different social media pages at theclevelandpodcast.com. Our episode notes for this and other episodes can be found in the photo albums on our Facebook page. You can follow along as you listen, as well as learn more from our sources about the subjects that we cover. You can also find links on our website to our YouTube channel, Spreaker, Google Play, Apple iTunes, Spotify, and more. Leave us a voicemail at 216-200-7940. Send us an email at theclevelandpodcast@gmail.com, or interact with us on Reddit, Facebook, or Twitter. We'd love to use your comments, ideas, and feedback in the show. We are a community-based podcast, so the more community interaction, the better. Have a great day, Cleveland.